Same recording. We're excited to have Galen and Joel and Ryan here. It's pretty neat because they put on the what is it called? The virtual marathon, M365 virtual marathon. Gotta say, it's a mouthful, guys. But they put this crazy global event on that went like around the world, went straight, was it like 36 hours straight, all using Teams, live events and meetings. I think they learned a lot of really good lessons out of it. And so now they're doing this really great tour where they're going around and basically talking about what they've done and all their use case experiences from that. So we're really excited to have them give us some time and go over that. So I'm going to go on mute and let them take it away.
All right, 1 second. And why don't we start with intros? You want to kick it off, Ryan, while I'm pulling up the screen?
Sure, I can do that. My name is Ryan Scouten, Microsoft MVP. I worked with these guys on the virtual marathon. I've been working with SharePoint for quite a while. I know a lot of the people at least recognize a lot of the names on here. I have spoken at least once at the Kansas City SharePoint Saturday, back when we were doing in-person events. I'd be glad to be able to be here and participating.
Awesome. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, Galen, yeah.
My name is Galen Keene. I'm a collaboration architect with a professional services company on the West Coast named Butterfly Technologies. And I'm also a president of the San Diego SharePoint user group, and have been working with Ryan, Joel, Jeff, who you see on screen but not joining us today, in the SoCal region of user groups. And Joel will go into how that led to the marathon, but it was awesome to work in the marathon, and it's awesome to join user groups such as this one and talk about it. So glad to be here and share some info with everyone.
All right, yeah. So I'm Joel Olison. I work for Proficient as a director. I'm a regional director. It's great to be working with Sharon on all this fun stuff. This virtual marathon as investing actually started from this wasn't something we were planning on doing before COVID. It actually started with, we were working on a community event, an M365 Saturday for Orange County, and the four of us plus a couple of other committee members were working on this Orange County event in California. And there was that kind of back and forth of, oh, should we cancel the event or not? And we decided, in fact, one of them, there was a meeting coming up to discuss it, and it was like, hey, this isn't going to happen. We might as well just full on cancel the event. And I was like, hold on. We could do this virtual. And a couple of the committee members were like, too much work. I won't name names. And they dropped out. And the few of us were like, hey, yeah, we could do this virtually. And Ryan, who's actually been running our user groups locally with Teams meetings, and we've done some live events with Teams, he was fully on board, which was awesome. And I knew having him working with us was going to be awesome. And so we got the four of us on board and basically brainstormed how we were going to do this. And I want to continue the story, but basically today what we're going to be talking about is how we turned that event into this blowout event, this virtual marathon, where we were like, in fact, the conversation turned from being, hey, let's do this little event for our community, to, hey, it's virtual. Anybody in the world can join this. And if you guys know anything about me, I love to travel. And when I travel, I try and connect with the community. In fact, I would debate with anybody that I've probably seen more user groups around the world than anybody. If anybody thinks that they know somebody who's seen more, I would love to do a comparison. In fact, at Ignite last year, they had a SharePoint Saturday list to see who had been to the most SharePoint Saturdays. And I was pretty much neck and neck with Christian, but I think I had 4 more than him, and I think it was 54 SharePoint Saturdays, different locations, not unique instances, but different locations. So that was kind of cool, interesting. And so when you add user groups on top of that, I basically for the last 10 years have been traveling, trying to connect with the community. And so I saw this as a fantastic opportunity to go back through all of the groups on Facebook that I joined. There were basically communities in Japan and Malaysia and all across South America, all of our sharing the point initiatives, basically trying to rekindle relationships and friendships. And social media has been fantastic for being able to do that. And so basically we took this, what would have been a physical event, into a virtual event and really embraced the world. And like I said, it was, hey, we could do this with Teams. And before that, no, I hadn't really seen too much of it, but we actually did do one in Philly. So there was an event about, I don't know, a few weeks earlier where I was working with Russ, and I had encouraged Russ Basura. We were doing this Teams Day online thing, and I was like, hey, we could do this with Teams live events, and so we did that one. And so on the back of that, I was like, hey, what can the platform support? Let's sessionize and all this technology and really make this go big. And we'll keep talking through that. All right. Oops. I know what I'm doing here. So basically, I just pulled the live event architecture before we get too far along. So basically, I want to talk about the technology in a single slide, and then we're going to kind of talk through how we used it. But essentially, what you've got is an organizer. And an organizer can schedule these live events through Stream, Yammer, or Teams. And so these Teams live events are actually slightly different than meetings, especially from a technology perspective of how they run. You've got, on the Teams side of it, you've got presenters, and you can have multiple presenters who connect through Teams to present, whether it's their screen or their slides or whatever. But you've got multiple presenters who have special roles, and they can present. There's basically a number of partners in this space, as you can see, where you can pull in streams from other locations as well. Like OBS Studio is a popular example of technology that you can actually use to enhance that experience, and especially as it relates to, say, Yammer or Stream, being able to leverage these other stream experiences. Like, say you're broadcasting for an event, you want to be able to get that camera feed and pull it in. And this is definitely something Ryan could talk to more than me, but basically it's the RTMP side of it. In fact, why don't you jump in, Ryan, just talking about the differences here between the two, because I know you've spent a lot more time on that.
Sure, I can talk about that. So yeah, the interesting thing about this is you have they have the two different options. If you want simplicity, easy to produce, no extra software required, producing the event in Teams is the simplest way to go. You can have external presenters, you can have whatever you need. Also, you get the ability to have external attendees, so you can have anonymous access available for your events. If you go with the producing with an app or device, so you're talking OBS, whatever, any of those sort of things, in the lower section there, you can do some really cool things, but you also have to change your paradigm a little bit in that you have to have access to whatever those sources are. So if you want to have somebody's video, you have to make sure you actually have it, because it's not like they're just going to be sharing it directly in the application with you. You have to kind of some ways about pulling it in. But with that, you can do some really high quality, almost TV broadcast level streams with those type of tools. If you're talking Teams events, you get some cool features, but there are some give and take there. Some things you lose by going with that approach. So that's kind of the difference between the different tools. The simplest is just going with Teams, but then, like I said, you do lose some of the power with it.
Yep. So this in fact, when you're creating the event, if you're setting up your live event, you really have some choices to make. And this is actually a screenshot right from the UI when you're creating it. But basically, with Yammer, you got Q&A, video stream, so you can do recording. You got captions available after the event, and then you can connect more cameras for like a studio experience. With Teams, slightly less. You have the Q&A, the video recorded automatically. In fact, that was one of the things we really liked about it, was the ability for it automatically to record. There's captions available, and we were able to do the closed captions while we're doing it, as well as the we enabled a number of those things. Some of those things are turned off by default, but we actually added the ability to translate. One of the features in there is actually we were really big on global, and so we picked 6 additional languages in addition to English that we would produce, that as we were doing our captions, people from these other 6 languages would be able to join in. And then, when you're talking about whether it's a corporate network and you're trying to do CDNs or even across the cloud, being able to use either Azure Media Services or content delivery. There's a number of third parties you can use for these eCDNs. In fact, I believe that Microsoft uses Hive internally, and Ramp has actually been a SharePoint partner for a long time. And then you kind of have your viewing experience. And so as it relates to our event, we absolutely were interested in being able to have guest presenters. So like anybody from the community, we could add them as a guest to the tenant and having them be able to present. And then from the viewing experience, we wanted to be able to support anonymous on basically any platform. So whether it was mobile or tablets or being able to tap in from home, the desktop, web, mobile experience. One kind of key thing here is your presenters. If you're doing it in Teams, they absolutely have to be using the rich client. They have to use that Teams client. They can't do both the organizers, producers, and presenters need to be in the Teams client. Which obviously, going with the other scenarios, those ones don't support anonymous. Was there anything else you wanted to add on here, Ryan, before we move on from an architecture experience?
I think architecture-wise, I think that covers most of it. Some of the other things we'll get into and touch from just as when it comes down to things we learned as we were producing the event. But I think this covers the high-level setup of it.
And one thing I would add as well is this looks fairly complex, but ultimately when it comes down to it, doing it on Teams live events, it was really just a conscious decision up front that we wanted to support tens of thousands of attendees, or at least more than 1,000 attendees. And we also wanted to be able to support anonymous, and we wanted to make it easy to consume. And the producers that we actually added into our system, which we'll talk about in a minute, we basically trained them within just a few minutes. Like we basically had a 1-hour long session to train our producers, and our producers did a fantastic job. And we'll talk more about that. So imagine being able to learn how to be a producer in less than an hour. So behind the scenes, our core team, what I would call the executive producers, which is not a role inside of SharePoint, but basically, or inside of Teams, we basically wanted to make sure that all of the different rooms were actually working properly. So we would jump from room to room to room, and in some cases, a number of cases, we had some events, live events that we needed to actually do the producing to step in where we didn't have volunteers. We divided the world up into 3 sections, which has continued to be kind of a best practice. This idea of there's actually, it's kind of interesting. There's 3 8 hour periods when you work when the sun goes around when the earth goes around the sun. Yeah, the sun doesn't go around the earth. So we broke it up into Americas, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and then APAC, Asia, Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, essentially. And we had Dipti from India, and we had AI or I from Japan, who was kind of coordinating things from a Japanese perspective, and we had Kiana from Czech for Europe. And whenever you present in Teams, make sure you check the box to get audio. I wish that was default and you had to uncheck it to not include audio, actually. Anyway, so going back to the languages, we actually really wanted to be able to support the world. We made a conscious decision that if we got enough support from the community, we would support their language. And we ended up with, and kind of that minimum bar was you need to come up with at least 6 sessions in your language, and we would support the language, adding it as a track. So we added French, Japanese, German, Portuguese, Korean, and Spanish. And we had basically these track leads to support the content in each of these tracks. And for the most part, they were able to also provide producers that were also localized. Few exceptions to that. Now, as I mentioned, we were talking about limits. So before COVID, there was actually a limit of Teams live events of 10,000 attendees. The event itself would last about 4 hours, and you could support 15 concurrent live events. So when we were first looking at this, we were thinking, oh, well, 15 wide across 24 hours, we could have nearly 300 sessions, right? Well, Microsoft decided fairly early during COVID, they said, you know what, we're going to double the size of the audience up to 20,000 attendees and support a maximum duration of 16 hours for a live event and have concurrent up to 50 concurrent live events. So we were looking at that and saying, oh, wow, we don't even have to worry about limits now. We can totally support hundreds. We could even support 1,000 sessions across a 24-hour period. And ultimately, we decided we were going to do a 36-hour event. I think there was something that was coming before us that was trying to do the 24-hour, and I think they were doing 30-something hours. So we were like, oh, we got to go beyond that. And we wanted to end our event with a SharePoint, the one that Bill Bear was playing with and was inviting people to. And so we started on a Wednesday, ended on Thursday with that SharePoint at the end. One mention on the live assistance. If you're going to do an event, whether it's a SharePoint Saturday or M365 event or even, sorry, like a corporate event where you have multiple live streams going at once, highly recommend that you fill out the form with at least a couple, it says 5 days before the live event. Highly recommend you do that so that they're aware of what you're doing. It seems like there may be something they can do to your tenant to make sure that it's a little bit more solid, but just being aware that your tenant is going to be doing multiple streams at once is highly recommended. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on here, but basically we did have some very serious values we wanted to get across as well. We really wanted this to be a community event. We wanted it to be free. We wanted to be very inclusive. We talked about all the languages. We also wanted it to feel exclusive, like there was really cool content from Microsoft, amazing keynotes, kind of embraced the MVPs, and but even people who it was their first time speaking, we really wanted to bring in everybody who wanted to participate in this event, as well as showcase the Microsoft technology, being able to really push Teams further than it had ever been pushed before. and making it accessible. We knew that there were people who were going to be attending that actually were deaf. So that was kind of interesting as well, as making sure that the closed captions thing was set up properly and that those particular users were getting the experience that was best for them.
I could add there, we did have a few users as we were kind of prepping and leading up to the event, had some questions came in through the registration channel saying, hey, do you guys support a dial-in number? Because we have some people that are hearing impaired, so they wanted to be able to have somebody kind of do the translation for them. Like, yeah, we'll have the dial-in numbers, but also with this, we'll have live captioning and live translation enabled, so simplifies the process where they don't have to have a translator if they don't particularly want one. So it kind of came in, the features of Teams really came in handy in that scenario.
So ultimately what we put together, we had 415 sessions across 355 speakers. The way we did our event, we wanted to keep the energy level up. So every 4 hours, we would have a Microsoft keynote such that everybody would come back together. And then we would, that keynote every 4 hours would be followed by 3 hours of breakout. And then basically the idea was having 50-minute sessions with 10-minute break in between. And you can see there a little bit of the breakdown. Since we were following Microsoft Build, we weren't as focused on dev, but you can see we still had the majority of our sessions were business, admin, some dev, power user, end user, executive, and diversity. So we had a number of different kinds of tracks. There were over 730 sessions that were submitted. Yeah, pretty wild event. And in fact, it was kicked off with by Jeff Teeper, but we had Chris McNulty and Caruana, Lori Popmeyer, Bill Baer, John Levesque, Naomi, and Chris McNulty. Yeah, really cool. It really came together, and Microsoft kind of supported us early on. And even encouraged us to connect with SPC. SharePoint conference was going to be canceled, but they wanted to be able to participate, and we thought, hey, let's reach out to those guys, and essentially we partnered up. They handled the sponsorships and working with some of the vendors, and then we handled the speakers, the tracks, the logistics, and getting rooms set up for the vendors. When you talk about how we pulled this event off, it was more than just Teams. Essentially, we used Eventbrite for registration. We used Sessionize for the speaker management, and even beyond, we used it for scheduling. And beyond that, Ryan actually built these really cool GitHub pages with the event site information, the bios, the schedule, kind of this click to join experience with language flags. We're going to dig into that in just a second. But from an outreach perspective, we primarily focused on social media. It was almost all Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and then leveraging the SharePoint Saturday, the spsevents.org website, so that anybody who was looking for events, we wanted to make sure anybody who wanted to join could join. And the platform itself for being able to join events was this site that we built. But it was it was basically, the delivery platform was really Teams. The live events for the sessions, we did do Teams meetings as a backup. So basically, if any live events had issues or we couldn't start them or that kind of thing, plan B was Teams meetings. We ran some Ask the Experts kind of panels in Teams meetings as well, because we really wanted that interactivity, as well as we ran the vendor booths through Teams meetings as well. We used Microsoft Forms. In fact, if you were sitting in any session, you'd see a QR code at the end of the session where you could give event feedback or speaker feedback. Tygraph, which was a partner, they gave us some really cool Twitter sentiment. They followed our hashtags and gave us some really cool stuff that you'll see a little bit later around reach. And our community zone, which was built in AltSpace VR, and Ryan basically built these. It was 3 rooms connected to each other. Ultimately, we had over 100 people who joined that experience across 400 plus sessions that they would go in over the course of the time. So there was some kind of interesting things that happened with the community zone. Even during the SharePoint, we did a little bit of AltSpace VR as well. My laptop must be dragging. Ryan, are you in a place where you could show some of those pages?
Let's do it.
You built? Awesome.
All right. Let's see. I am going to share a whole screen, but I am not including audio because we don't need that part. Oop, wrong screen. That's probably over here then. All right. So one of the things, as is mentioned, we ended up using GitHub Pages for being able to set up the content because we didn't need anything fancy. We just need to be able to share our content and be able to easily update it. So if you're not aware, GitHub has the ability for any repository that you can set up a URL, as we have here, and it will load that content. There we go. And so it'll pull that content up and surface it out. So you're not getting any server-side processing, but it's responsive. It works. So all of this is just HTML and JavaScript. We are including, as Joel mentioned, content that we get sourced from SessionEye. So if you're clicking on the speakers page, you can see we have a little pulsing orb here that pulls in the content that was submitted by the speakers. So, for example, we have their picture, we have name, title, their bio, and any included sessions that they're on. We did also, for anybody that's interested, embed a Power BI report that kind of shows you where all of our speakers are coming from. So you can see we have a global distribution of where people are coming from anywhere clear out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean to quite a few people in Europe, across the United States. We do have some people that I guarantee you we don't have a speaker that far north in Canada, but if you just put in, it's like some of the speakers, only thing we had was the country, so it picks up point in the middle of the country. So we had one user that said the only thing on social media or anything, their location was Canada. So they end up there. But it's kind of interesting just kind of show all the different pieces. Yet again, all this just fairly basic content. Let's drag this and scroll. Also, same thing with sessions. Schedule was a slightly different animal because I know Joel will talk about this a little later, but this sucker was just massive. As part of this as well, all the schedule and things were pulled in and built by SessionEye. So we injected some things. We have a session here from Sharon where we pulled in some different pieces of information. And we also included, it looks like it's not, you have to refresh the page here. There it goes. So we pulled in stuff. We give them a nice, easy way to join. Plus, as Joel mentioned, a flag showing what country what language that session will be spoken in. So, for example, the majority of our sessions were in English. We did have tracks over here that are in French and in Spanish and Japanese. As Joel mentioned, all of our other languages. But the nice part is all this just comes in and loads from the tools that we've got. So it's more of just kind of a conglomeration, a mashup of the different tools that we are using for the application. As Joel also mentioned, we did have the community zone. Here's just a snapshot of as we're kind of prepping, going through this, which was kind of a cool experience where you can actually get in and in-person talk with different people. So I kind of like this. I know there's been some things talking about Microsoft lately with their whole theater seated style mode for Teams meetings that they're coming out with. This kind of gets a similar type thing, but you're actually seeing people in a three-dimensional space. So for me, it feels like you can connect more with people than you would if you're just in a standard meeting where you have a bunch of squares that you're staring at. So you get a lot of benefits out of it. You do get some of the nonverbal communication that goes on, but not 100% because it doesn't mimic facial expressions and all sort of things. You can follow hands. If somebody that's very talkative with their hands, as you can see my hands flipping all over the place because that's the way I am. You get to see some of that, but you don't get the full nonverbal and the body cues and all that sort of stuff. But it is kind of a really cool experience. We even had some instructions on simple ways of joining, but it really worked out really well. And just to speak to the performance of the GitHub pages, this site was able to handle, I think at some point in time we had, over the couple days, we had 30,000 unique users visit this site. And it just performed, it was responsive, no problems. Beauty of it is, we paid nothing for the site. We had to pay for the domain, but you can't get past that one. But the site just worked. There are ways you can use a GitHub page without a custom domain if you want. It'll just be github.com stuff in front of it if you'd really want to go more cost effective. But it performed, it handled everything, and it just worked. It was beautiful.
Awesome. So we'll jump back into the deck. I do think that those pages really made a difference in terms of what we could do and how we were delivering it in this kind of virtual space. I think it's one of the things that's, whether you say it's missing or whether you say some effort is required. I looking back at how we did it versus some of these other events, MVP Summit this past year was actually done with Teams live events, and they had a zip file of, I think it was more than 100 ICS files, those Outlook files. And it was after that experience I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way for us to be able to show what sessions there are without having somebody to go through a file system to essentially know what sessions to join. And I think the experience we built, there were a couple more things we wanted to do. We wanted to put a front end on it, and some ability to do some cool filtering so you can actually see what all the sessions were. And what's awesome is one of our speakers built a Power BI report, and I would encourage you to check this out. If we have time at the end, I'll come back here. But basically, if you go to bit.ly or bit.ly/M365 marathon with a capital M, you can see this experience where you can basically look at look at the sessions by language, by audience, by description and title. You could basically say, hey, show me only the sessions about SharePoint Spaces, or I want to just see Power Platform. So you could basically filter the 416 sessions that are in here and even look at them in calendar view, and basically join these sessions. So this was a really cool ability to basically filter it by time, by room, all sorts of cool stuff. And this was actually Toshi, or was it Yoshi? Sorry, from Japan, one of the MVPs in Japan who built this. Really awesome. Ultimately we had 12,774 people register for the event. When it comes down to how many actually attendees we had, that's a potentially different number, but we'll get into that in a second. What was really interesting is our top 3 cities were actually all in India, which is kind of fascinating. 7% came through Eventbrite itself, which is really fascinating. But attendee-wise, we had 115 plus different countries that were represented, and that was actually a report I ran about a week before it even started. So potentially more than that. In terms of where people were sitting, like I said, we divided the world into 3 sections. It was 47% in the Americas, 33% in EMEA, and then 20% in APAC. Really fascinating how it all came together. We did get the attention of Jeff Teeper, which was really awesome. He was very interested in getting our feedback. We actually did sessions with the Teams team, including those who are focused on meetings. And and basically, if you're looking for more of the background, I did do a write-up on my blog on collabshow.com. I think it's a post or 2 back, but you can see kind of the behind the scenes running the event. Now, roles. I want to talk about the different roles. We talked a little bit about, from an architecture perspective, that you've got this organizer who sets up the event. So in our case, Ryan was the one who went in, set up these live event meetings. and configures the options and manages the reports and so on. Well, there's only one organizer. So that's really important to understand. The person who is the organizer, they're really ultimately the only one who can actually change the meeting itself. And you want to talk more about that, Ryan?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things we ran into is kind of, as Joel mentioned earlier, the increase in specs and numbers about the information we can have. Our initial plan was we were going to set up a live event for every session. As we're going through that, we quickly realized that wasn't going to work. When we were talking 400, we had 415 sessions that we had to schedule, and there is no programmatic way to schedule a live event at this point. So we're looking at it, like, okay, manually creating 415 of these things, yeah, that's not going to work out so well. So we opted to go with 8-hour-long rooms. So it ended up being like you were at a SharePoint Saturday. You had people going in the same room, speakers sharing the same place. If the same session was in the same room you wanted to, the attendee could just hang out and sit in both. So it worked. But as part of that, we had the different things. And so I ended up creating all of the rooms, which if we had 8, we had 3 sessions. Well, we had a keynote, 3 sessions, keynote, 3 sessions, and then another keynote. And so it's kind of carried on. It worked out really well, but it just kind of introduced its own idiosyncrasies. And one of the things we found is, like Joel had mentioned, the person setting up the event is what they call an organizer, and they are the only person that can make adjustments to that meeting. So say, for example, you want to add in another producer or add in another speaker, only the organizer can make those type of changes. So if you're doing a long event like we did, it kind of becomes an issue if somebody plans on getting any sleep during that time frame, because we ended up took shifts to sleep, but I ended up leaving my machine up and logged in so they can come in and make changes to them. So one of those things to keep in mind, if you're doing a smaller event for your company, it's not as big a deal because they can be available and they can be accessible. So that was the biggest things we ran into with that. Also, we found that the accessing the content afterwards, as long as any of the producers can access it, as long as they actually have an account in your tenant. So the biggest limitation was just the fact that the organizer was the only person that can go in and make changes to it.
Ryan, can you also speak to adding producers, though, to adding producers to the calendar item?
Yeah. So one of the things that we found is if you're adding a producer, they can see the calendar as long as they have an account in your tenant. We had a lot of time frames we were going through things where we had guest producers, guest speakers, because this was a large community event, not for an internal organization. So we had a number of accounts since we ran this entire thing on a free MVP tenant, and it worked. So I had a number of licenses that I said, hey, so we assigned them out to the team. So we had a number of people that could actually get on and see, okay, here's all the events. But yeah, in order to be able to see those things on the calendar, they actually have to have a full account in the tenant.
Yeah. So the other thing was he was mentioning how the organizer is kind of responsible for the event. We were running 36 hours, and so when Ryan needed to go to bed, so we're talking probably nearly 20 hours into his day, we went with, okay, well, Ryan, don't log out of your machine, so we could actually make sure if we needed to make any changes, we still had the organizer account essentially available to us. Normally, your organizer would still be at your event, but that ended up being a little bit of a challenge for us, just since it seemed like it was kind of single point of failure, which we were trying to avoid in all situations. With most events, that would not be as big of a deal. But if your organizer gets hit by a bus, it could be a problem. Not to downplay the getting hit by a bus, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So in terms of other roles we had at our event that you traditionally may not have, we did have track owners. Our track owners would coordinate with us. They would basically try and manage the speakers, and in some cases, especially with foreign languages, they would manage the producer aspect as well, making sure that their producers were lined up as well as their speakers and kind of coordinating that way. So we kind of had strong kind of dual leadership for these foreign language tracks. And as an example, the Japanese track, flawless. It was fantastic. It ran perfectly. Never had a hiccup. We had both really good producers and really good speakers that just did a really fantastic job there. I want to dig more into the producer side of it, so I'm not going to dig into this one right now, but I'm going to be handing this off to Galen in a second to talk more about how we worked with our producers. But basically, our speakers think of them as they just had to worry about presenting their video or their audio, and the producers would handle making sure that it looked good and giving the speaker feedback if there was any kind of technical difficulties. And then the attendees, it was their responsibility just to watch. You know, they could actually join via mobile or through the web. It could be anonymous or authenticated, but basically watching it live or on demand. And when I say on demand, basically all of the sessions, or at least 90+% of them, are now on YouTube. There's only a couple that we're still troubleshooting, but basically all of them are up there. And that schedule that you saw on m365virtualmarathon.com, you can click through to that, and those sessions are all hot. You can click through and actually get the sessions on demand. So that was kind of cool too.
Yeah, one of the things we did as well is we had all of our speakers were coming in as guests, which technically for the longest time was not supported. We've kind of played around with it, tried to figure it out. I do have to make a shout out to John Moore, who kind of pointed us in the right direction about how to get that working, because that was one of the things we were trying to figure out. And he mentioned, we figured out, had some people play with it, you just have to do this. And what this is in order for you to have an external guest speaker, which if you're doing this for a user group or different things, this scenario can definitely happen for most people. They just have to be a guest in your tenant and a member of a team. Doesn't have to be any particular team, but they just have to be a member of a team and a guest in your tenants, which kind of those two are redundant. If you add them to a team, they become a guest. But what we found as well is that the speaker has to make sure that they're switching. They have to be signed in with the correct account, and they have to switch to your org in order to be able to do their presentation correct role, which it's the same thing for producers as well. But that's just one of the things that we found out that just really kind of had to do we did some tech checks to make sure people were familiar with the process to be able to get back in and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now I can connect in and have the correct role. Because otherwise, if they don't follow those steps, they'll become in as an attendee instead of the role that they were assigned.
So I want to give you some layers of chaos. We had 22 simultaneous sessions at our peak widest that we were, which was like day 2 at 4 a.m. or something like that, where it was basically all of Europe. Asia was kind of ending, as well as East Coast starting to spin up. I guess it would have been 7 a.m. there. But we had 14 English simultaneous sessions with 2 Japanese, 2 French, 2 Spanish, 1 Korean, 1 German, and 1 Portuguese, all going on simultaneously. And you can imagine with seeing all these different sessions happening simultaneously. We had some that were human producers, some where we actually had a virtual desktop that was kind of connected to the session, where we would still jump in and make sure it was running, but we would basically have kind of a connected virtual user who would be sitting on the room. Because one of the things we learned was if you're running an 8-hour session or 8-hour room, as Ryan was talking about how we were running not one live event per session, we were actually running one, and then it would continue to last for 8 hours. Well, during our keynotes, those rooms would go empty. And if you didn't have someone in the room, that room would close. And if a room closes, you can't reopen it. So we would actually sit on all these rooms that we basically, what we found was with Teams, a human, a single desktop, single Windows user could connect to up to a maximum of 4 rooms at once. So we, even going into it, we knew we wanted to have multiple laptops. So we each joined with our laptops. I probably had 3 or 4 in front of me. Ryan and Galen had about the same, and we would, as well as Galen had 10 additional VMs that he would use, so that we could connect and essentially sit on rooms as well as produce rooms. And that is obviously a lot more than you would need to do if, say, you're running a corporate event with maybe 2 or 4 simultaneous sessions. You could do that with a single Windows machine. But when you start getting into the 8, 10, 20 simultaneous rooms going on, you do need to think more logistically about how do you keep those alive? Because if there's no speaker, no producer, even if you got attendees, it will die. It will stop running. So, and once it goes down, it's down. So this is where I want to talk a little about producers, and then we're going to have Galen dive in on what we did training wise and talking about what we did for the producers. But we actually had 68% of our sessions were done with people, live producers. And then for the remaining sessions, we had there was about 32% of them where it was Ryan, Galen, or I who would jump in, get the session kicked off, and then kind of sit on it just to make sure things were going well. And we would monitor the chat from the room. So if a speaker had an issue, or even producers from these other rooms, they would basically chat and let us know whether they were having any issues. And so we kind of monitor the chat. We also had kind of a war room style chat where if anybody was having any issues and wasn't getting support, they could jump into the war room, and we had somebody sitting on the war room audio wise where they could let us know, hey, I need help, and we could then jump into the session. We did have 5 producers who produced more than 9 sessions, which means 11 hours of content. So that was, when we talk about this being a marathon, I think that Ryan, Galen, and I, we all got less, it was, we individually put in probably about 30 hours or so into this thing. It was pretty incredible. So how we did, we've talked about how many attendees we had. When you look at your teams, you actually get these attendance reports. So when you look at the all up attendance report, you'd actually see that we had 31,701 total views across the 2 days. So what does that mean? Well, those are people who joined a session. So ultimately what that means is if you look at the 12,000, people probably on average went to 3 or 4 different sessions is what that means. So that's fantastic for us, especially when you expect the 50% drop off when people attend or they sign up and then they don't attend. In our case, we had we created these pages with join links on them. So I believe that we actually, not only did we probably have some who just didn't attend or forgot about it or whatever, but we also had people who joined who probably hadn't registered. So the web page itself would show that we actually had about nearly 41,000 users over the course of a few days over this time period, ultimately leading to about nearly 70,000 sessions, people refreshing the page or navigating there to potentially 3, 4 different sessions and so on average. But some people stuck with us potentially for 8 to 10 plus hours, and then some even came back, and we got plenty of attendees as well as speakers saying, hey, when those videos going to be live? The video processing really consumed a lot of time, took us a lot of effort. I'll have Ryan and Galen talk about that as well, but before we do, a couple of other statistics. We use tyGraph, which is one of the partners in the community. They actually do statistics for SharePoint and Teams as well, like the whole M365. But we got this really cool sentiment score, so we can actually see from the people who were tweeting, people were very positive about it. On average, most of the sessions, or most of they look at Christian Buckley's collab talk stuff. They look at Ignite and Inspire and all these different events and monitor sentiment. The average for all the events they've been looking at are 0.74. Ours was at 0.83. So that tells us that we actually had very positive remarks from the people who were tweeting, and we had over 2,000 tweets over the course of those 2 days, with lots of impressions and fairly good reach across the community. Was really cool to see the various languages as well, with the Japanese and the Korean really strong throughout the event. And this is going to dig more into what we're talking about producer wise, but essentially, when you look at those rooms, this is basically looking at the first block of each of our rooms. You can actually see we were able to kind of get some numbers of how each of our rooms did. So you get the idea that, yeah, those rooms, even though when you're in the session, it might look like there's only 30 or so connected, ultimately, because of the number of anonymous users, it's not until later we would go in and be able to see exactly how our rooms ultimately did. So don't be discouraged when you say, oh, there's only 30 people in your session. Well, actually, we actually got a lot more than that. But because of anonymous, it kind of downplays the number of people who are actually in those rooms. And you would notice Japanese was our most popular, beyond that first track. But really cool to be able to see that much support for the foreign languages as well. So let's dive into the producer experience. I know that it's difficult to actually do teams on top of teams to be able to show how Teams works, especially with Teams live events. But I do want Galen to talk about the producer experience. He built a number of guides. He made an attendee guide, a producer guide. And let's hand it over to Galen to talk about the producer experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so everyone, what I focused on was trying to make sure that the attendee experience of the event would be, as high of a quality as it could be, and that we could enable the speakers to have a producer in each of the sessions. So our goal was to enable speakers to come in, present, not have to worry about the production aspect of Teams. So from that perspective, we had a lot of people signing up to be a producer that had never produced live events in Teams before. So the first thing is, Joel spoke about the link to fill out a form if you're going to, produce a live event or have a live event. So definitely fill that form out. But then secondarily, takeaway is go ahead and schedule test live events. Get in the event as a producer as well as an attendee and run through many tests from those different roles so that you can see the experience for yourself. That's what I did over the course of half a day to produce this guide. And this guide takes into account various things like Ryan saying that producers need to join the meeting or the live event from their own tenant. And I'm just kind of leaving up the table of contents page here so that you can see all of the various things that the guide includes. And I just want to make a shout out to Yana. She's responsible for making this look pretty. And here you basically have a number of different procedures as well as timing. So what we tried to do was provide our producers a series of events that would happen. Remember, we had a keynote followed by 3 speaking sessions thereafter. So as a producer, you're managing a room and you have a keynote ending and a speaker showing up, and then before that speaker is done presenting, you have another speaker showing up. So this timing section tries to provide guidance for how you as a producer would handle those speakers coming in and sessions ending, and stitching all of that concurrently. Remember that we had some producers, that are producing sessions in excess of 11 hours in length. I can tell you that there was one person that did 16 hours of production and spoke. So we had some real true marathon runners out there. And then finally, we had some unplanned scenarios. So imagine, speaker doesn't show, or there's some network difficulty, which we did experience. What happens then? How do you communicate that out? To do that, we had both some instructions, but we also had a deck that we created for each of the producers to leverage throughout the 10 minutes between sessions. But in addition to that, it included unplanned scenario kind of slides as well. So we're having network difficulties, that kind of thing. So highly recommend that you get in, you capture this experience for yourself, and that you provide some type of run of show procedure, some timing to both your producers as well as your speakers, so that they know what to expect, and that in the event that you need to provide anything out to your attendees, you do that as well. And so to Joel's point, we did have an attendee guide that we created that kind of walked through how to navigate the website that Ryan created, and then what to expect when joining sessions or navigating out to the community zone, how to take advantage of the tech that was being provided for the event. Back to you, Joel.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the stuff that Galen put together, we did speaker with the speak check and the producer checks that we did, I think really made a difference as well. Like we really wanted all of our speakers to, at a minimum, join in the Teams live event, show their screen, show PowerPoint, just show that they could actually do it. Those that did that, we didn't have a single, kind of issue with speakers joining, because it validated that they could join via guest and that they knew how to share their screen. So that was a huge deal, being able to do that in prep. I think without that, we would have had so much more chaos and so many more problems. Same kind of deal with our producers. We actually had training sessions with the producers so that they would know how to, if somebody says, hey, I want to do video, and his the guide that Galen put together had a number of questions. Do you want to show your video? Do you want to, obviously everybody did slides, so that was kind of an easy thing. But being able to say what they wanted to be able to support, do you want me to do your Q&A for you? Or are you going to do your own? So there were a number of questions of that dialogue that could be captured in that guide of, these are the things you should be, this is the dialogue you should be having with your speaker, between the producer and speaker, to be able to kind of make sure that things are nice and tight.
And just to throw that in from a lessons learned perspective, and one of the key reasons why I cannot stress enough that you should get in and play with the tech, especially if you're using native Teams instead of like an OBS type of platform, is when you have one speaker that's presenting content, and you're going to the next speaker that's going to present their own content, how do you manage that, the content stream switching from the first speaker to the next? How you do all of that is very important. And within the Teams client itself, there are some limitations. You don't have control over content streams like you do video streams. So as soon as that second speaker begins sharing content, their content supersedes the previous speaker's content stream. So getting all of that under control and understanding how that works so that you can sequence out those events is key to the success of your live event. So there are some things in that train of thought that are in the guide, but definitely, test that on your own as well.
Yeah, and actually you can kind of see in the screenshot what it was like for the producer, where you would be able to see the queue and the live. one of the really kind of key things we understood as well is as soon as you share your screen, you're actually sharing your screen. So you might think that the queue is before it goes live, you can basically queue your screen. That's actually not the case. Basically, the queue is basically picking, do you want to show the full thing, or do you want to show it the screen plus the video? So it's being able to pick and choose between these two templates, which are pretty simple. But basically, if you want to show the video, you choose the one on the right, and then you basically pick the content, which side you want it to be on, which obviously it should be on the left, and then you add the video, and you may have multiple videos. So ultimately, it's kind of choosing what do you want to be on the left, what do you want to be on the right, and then you click send live, or send live makes it go live. And then the bane of our existence in this event was this little red button. You think, oh, well, what does end do? That just back in pre-mode, or it puts us back in to where we can send it live. The end button is the biggest, craziest final aspect of this whole thing. Basically, in our producer training, we basically had to say, I think it was a half dozen times, never click the end button, never click the end button, never click the end button. If someone clicked the end button, it would close the room permanently. That live event was over. There's no little pop-up that says, hey, you realize there's still 100 people connected to this. There's nothing like that. Basically, if you click end, you have just ended the live event and every live event that comes after it. So that was kind of a crazy thing. We've definitely given that feedback to the product team that's just way, way, way too permanent. But
that happened 3 times.
Yeah,
I think it 3 times. Yeah.
And we've talked about, like, when we had our feedback with Microsoft, we mentioned we understand why it's there, because you do get a pop-up that says, hey, you're ending the event. Problem is that pop-up is very similar to the pop-up of when you leave the event. Microsoft has designed that button to be fairly easily, because most scenarios people are going to end instead of leave. In our case, that wasn't it. Either a few times during the events, I'm finding myself like, okay, I need to go jump to another room to go check on it, and just out of habit, like, okay, big red button, that's what I need to click, because we're used to hitting the red hang up when we're in a meeting. And then like, oh, that's right, nope, up to the top. I have to go hit leave and not end. So yeah, we had some scrambles that we had to run through whenever anybody hit end. So we are painfully aware every time it happened.
So I just want to be cognizant of the time. We're at 1:00 right now. You guys are welcome to stick around and chat with the guys as they finish up their presentation. But just want to point out, if you do need to go, we totally understand that, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
So Joel, should we just jump to the lessons learned?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think more of these are just some visuals anyway, so you can kind of see how many sessions and so on. A little bit of the meetings versus live events. And I think a lot of people were able to kind of gather that. Basically, the live events are for larger events. It's much larger scale. And setting them up. Basically, the supported platform where you can see, for producer, presenter, it's pretty much you need to use that desktop app. Attendee gets to use everything. And the reports that you can get at the end, which were very valuable. The feedback, there are some challenges if you're trying to you're trying to run your SharePoint Saturday or whatever. There's some challenges with guests. We talked about that, making sure that they are part of the team. Absolutely make sure they've joined before. So then when they click the calendar link, in fact, that's another thing, is you actually should be in the right tenant before you join as well. That was actually a big deal. If people join either through the web, or they join from their phone, or they join from their own tenant, it would fail as well. They would end up being an attendee instead of a speaker or producer. So that's important. We talked about the live event is permanent. And just some last kind of minute things here, some lessons learned. The pre and post live experience is a little bit rough. So basically, if the live meeting hasn't started, it basically says the live meeting hasn't started, and it's kind of ugly text. So I absolutely would recommend being able to have a better experience. So making sure you go live, and we would have our producers click the go live as soon as they can, and then basically put up a slide so that there's a friendlier experience when you're waiting for the session to begin. The back channel, basically, if the speaker and producer are speaking, if they've clicked start live, which I was just saying is something they should do fairly early, you get some challenges there where basically you can hear the speaker and producer talking. So the coordination is important. You may use chat. In fact, chat is something that the producer and speaker can do using the chat, and the attendees don't see the chat, which in some ways is like a downside. Some people want to be able to have chat, to be able to chat with the attendees, and with live events, there's no chat for the attendees, just the Q&A. Anything else here you guys would point out? The scripting, I think we mentioned that right now there is no really good API for being able to create live events. That's definitely something we've been asking for and would love to have. Your traditional Teams meetings can be created, but the live events right now can't be scripted.
One other thing that I'd throw out is just something to keep in mind. The scenario that we ran into is we spoke about the owner having control of the calendar item. So the owner could go in and add additional presenters to the calendar item pretty much at any time, but cannot add additional producers to the calendar item. So something to take or to keep in mind. Once your live event begins, you're stuck with the producers that have been identified in the calendar item.
Cool. So with that, I would highly encourage everyone to do a live event. Do it inside your company. If you guys want to do a community one, definitely reach out. I'm happy to mentor or help anybody. Even the software you saw that we put into building out that website, we're actually looking at being able to build a GitHub around it for the community. Basically, the next time around, and yes, there will be a next time around, we want to be able to make it so that it's easier for people to do the same thing we did. Yeah, so we're talking about what's next. Well, and these times are probably incorrect anyway, so I probably should edit that. But August 27th, we are talking about launching a virtual community. So we talked about this massive event and how we were able to kind of pull the world together to do this incredible thing. We want to do kind of like a virtual user group for the world. And to launch that user group for the world, we plan on having a massive launch party. And when we say party, what do you mean launch party? Well, we want to have music, talking, geeking out, cosplay, trivia. Is Joy still on? Joy, are you on?
I did get to come back. My meeting was canceled.
Oh, good. Oh, awesome. Awesome. I was hoping you would. So I was just talking about this, the virtual party we're going to be running, and I wanted to talk about the cosplay.
Yes. So, okay, let's be real. We're all geeks of one, stripe or another. One of the visions that Joel had that he has passed on to Yana and I is to have a cosplay competition and for folks to join into teams, and those teams could be anime, comic book, superhero, sci-fi, Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever, teams, and to go through competitions. And we're all hoping for 7x7 by then. That could be.
Or the together mode would be cool too.
Oh man, that would be even the best. Awesome. And actually see the team in all their costumes as if they were together. That would be super cool. There'll be some very easy, basic ground rules, but real fun competition. And then the winner, maybe even the semifinalists do a parade. and
Yeah,
then a winner
yeah,
be announced. But how fun
absolutely.
is that?
Yeah, super excited. We're talking like mass trivia, some lightning talks, a panel or two. We've already lined up Keith Ritchie's music. He's going to do some shout outs. If you haven't heard of Keith Ritchie, he was actually product support for SharePoint for many, many, many years. Joey Snow, he's a awesome DJ on the weekends, but he's a Microsoft Azure guy in the week. So we've got some really cool music talent that are kind of geeks in the day, and then they're music people at night, and so on. So if you've been to many Red parties, Joey Snow is often one of the featured DJs at some of the Red parties, and at Tech Eds and Ignites, you'll often see him spinning his records. And he does stuff on the weekends as well, some cool summertime mixes. So we've already talked about these guys, lined them up for being able to do some really cool music stuff. And we're building out a lobby in SharePoint Spaces. So you'll be able to see what's going on, be able to jump into the rooms and participate in various multiple activities. It's gonna be awesome. And what is this all about? Yeah, absolutely. This is about launching a global community. That's basically a virtual community where we'll be able to really network and connect with each other. And so some of the ideas we're talking about, being able to have multiple language hosts for the party, but being able to feature the Teams technology as well as Teams live events, being able to pull off pretty incredible event. And I mentioned August 27th. We're going to be kind of doing August 27th. It's probably going to be around 9 p.m. We're probably going to do the Asia one. So basically we're going to do 3 parties. We're going to do 2 during Ignite, and we're going to do 1 that's during that's on August 27th to basically kick the tires, be able to just let our hair down, have a fantastic time. The link right now is not up to register, but we've been working on doing all of this that we're talking about. It's building a community on top of the technology. So every member of the community will be able to be a full M365 E5 user. So and we'll be building it inside of a tenant. So really fun, exciting stuff. And with that, I think we still have a number of users on. We can definitely take some questions.
This is Sherry. Just let us know how we can support you in the next event. That was a lot of fun the last time. So
Awesome.
It'll be back, and it'll be bigger. So should be some good times.
So it looks like we have some questions. They want to know about sharing the guide and the PowerPoint that you guys showed in the session. Will you be sharing that out?
I think that's the Galen question.
Well, we got the PowerPoint deck that you presented, Joel. I don't think we have a problem sharing that one.
Yeah, right.
The other one was a lot of Galen's personal time and work, so that's whether he's willing to share or not.
You're muted, Galen.
Sorry about that. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is that the event was, by the community for the community. So I think from a community perspective, we want to make sure that all the resources around how we produce the event are made available. So Joel did mention previously that there's some larger context around how GitHub was leveraged, Eventbrite, and the various technologies. So I think as we package that up, I'd like to include the decks and the guides as part of that. Just real quick, it's been, it's underestimated what post-production is like in an event like this, but it is just as time-consuming. in some ways even more time consuming than pre-production. So the fact that we have those videos up there has been a labor of it's been labor. Ryan's taken on the bulk of it, but it's been a lot. So there's a short breath of fresh air, and then we'll get back to making the rest of the content available.
Yeah, if you guys want to send any of that over to me, we can make sure that anything that you have gets shared out, whether that's a link or a specific file. We can make sure it gets shared out to the user group. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming and talking to us and going through all of this and answering all the questions. I know it's a really hot topic right now, and everybody's asking a lot about, how can you do it and what have you learned from this? So thanks so much for sharing that. If anybody else has any other questions, if you just want to email me, I'll be glad to pass them along. And we'll be sending out whatever we get from them out to the group afterwards. But thank you guys again for coming, and you guys have a great week, and we'll see all of you next month.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Party on.